I welcome you to the second lecture related to the fourth week um, concerning history of Arabic literature as course title and Arabic literature during Abbasid periods. We'll be discussing the phenomenon, the historical phenomenon of poetry and poetics during the Abbasid times. The Abbasid poetry or the poetry, Arabic poetry during the Abbasid period represents a very fine, well constructed, well designed genre of a poetics ever produced in East. So it depicts the human life, the human activities, the human issues, thoughts, cultures, and all thing related to human life, the worldview or the concept of human philosophizing of things like nature, God, cosmos, etc. So this is what we find in the Abbasid poetry. Abbasid poetry, which is the golden age of Arabic literature. Abbasid times represent the golden period of of Arabic literature. Poetry has been an intellectual, social, and artistic expression of anything humans come into contact, humans interact with, whether it is the immediate aspects of nature, immediate phenomena of nature, or anything that is seen in the spaces, or anything that humans feel within his inner heart, in the core of his heart and mind. So his feelings, his thoughts, his emotions, his well constructed cognitive exercises that produces thought and thought inputs. So poetry deals with all these things. It reflects the spirit of Abbasid era. So anything that comes to us as a primary representative of a significant representative of the Abbasid era, the Abbasid time, the spirit of Abbasid time. So it is the vehicle of poetry. The poetry shifted from the tribal to cosmopolitan expression. So first it was the tribal expression, which is usually known as الطبيعة, شعراء الطبيعة, شعراء الطبيعة, also شعراء البادية, شعراء البادية, because Badi actually represented Tabi'a in its purity. So there was something like a paradigm shift, because here we must recollect that famous saying of Ahmad Amin, that Islam was a religion in Mecca, it became a religion and society in Medina, it became religion and society and a state in Damascus during the time of the Umayyads, and the religion and society and the state and culture, civilization at Baghdad under the patronage of the Abbasids. The poetry reflected diversity and blending of culture, that is Persian, Greek, Indian. Of course, we'll be adding Indian in this domain. Why Indian? Because we'll be finding a number of books translated from the Indian languages, chiefly, primarily Sanskrit into Arabic, Panchatantra, Surya Siddhanta, and other books. And the second thing is that the Abbasid Chamberlains, Al-Brahmika, they were actually the Parmukh, which were corrupted into Al-Brahmika. The Burmakite Chamberlains who hailed from Afghanistan, Bactria, Balakh, and with the advent of Islam or the spirit of Islam in Persia, they came into the fold of Islam. But they patronized Indian wisdom, Indian literature, and invited a number of persons from India, like Manko, Shanak, and others. We'll be talking about that in the domain of translation. While we're talking about the translation movement in a specific lecture. So, because of the Burmakites, Indian aspect becomes very prominent. The poetry reflected diversity and blending of cultures. Persian and Greek. Main centers for arts and poetry were Baghdad, Basra, and Kufa, because they were the chief centers of political activities, cultural activities. Poetry seen as a symbol of prestige for court and elite circles. So here, poetry was not limited to the Bedouin culture or Bedouin preferences. Now it graduated into the court and had acquired the position of a symbol of prestige for the elite class. Integration of Persian aesthetics and Greek rationalism into Arabic verse. As we can recollect, the Arabic poetry, the Arabic verse, right from the early Islamic period. In the specimen we have from Shu'ara al-Sa'alik or Ashab al-Mu'allaqat, Antara or Nabigha or Imr al-Qais or Zuhair, or the poets who were before them, like Muhalhin and others. We find that it is deep rooted into the Arab psyche, the Bedouin culture, the desert culture. So here, desert culture and Bedouin culture stand something contrary to, in opposite directions to what is understood by the cosmopolitan culture, the urban culture, where there are the aesthetics, the urban aesthetics, and this urban aesthetics is sometimes based on rationalism, is rational thinking. So rational thinking was incorporated on the thought level into the Arabic domain amidst the translations that were carried out during the Abbasid times, where many books were translated from Greek as well as Indian culture, Indian languages, Greek and Indian languages into Arabic. Books of Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, etc., were translated, and that's why these books have been preserved in the history. Till at a later stage, the original codices, the manuscripts, were found in Byzantium cities, in Byzantium geographical regions. So there was integration of Persian aesthetics and Greek rationalism into Arabic verse. So here we have the philosophical poetry. That's why we have the philosophical poetry. We have the poetic emotions very much consolidated in the domain of art, in the realm of art, reflecting deep aesthetics alongside rationalism that got represented in a specific school, that is the school of philosophical poetry, chiefly patronized by Abul Ala al-Ma'arri and some other poets. Emergence of modern poets like Muhaddathun, like Muhaddathun. Why? Because in the history of Arabic literature related to poetry, we have Qudama, and we have Muhaddathun. This is not Muhaddithun, rather this is Muhaddathun. That is the modern. Modern doesn't stand here for the word modern doesn't stand here for someone who lives in the 21st century or 23rd century. Rather, the person who was not modern was the person who lived during the Abbasid times, having the contemporary preferences, contemporary blends of thought, contrary to the Bedouin culture or the thoughts who still had didn't liberate themselves, were unable to liberate themselves from the mold of the love of the Bedouin culture. So they were the modern at the time. They were muhaddathun. They were muhaddathun. Just as we have term of mukhadram. Mukhadram is the person who finds two ages, two times. That is two times of the Abbasids and times of the Umayyads. So he is mukhadram al-dawlatain, al-Abbasi wal-Umayyah. The person who finds Islam and pre-Islamic period, he is mukhadram al-Asrain, al-Jahiliyyah wa al-Islam. So it is like that. So muhaddathun in this meaning. So there was emergence of modern poets, that is muhaddathun. Rejection of traditional convention in terms of opening of the poem. Here we have that we see that nasib, the traditional way of opening a poem is represented by nasib. By nasib. What is this nasib? It is like just exploring the inner heart and mind about the reminiscences related to the beloved, the geography of the beloved, the places associated with the beloved, alongside the state of emotions, thoughts in the mind. So it was like as we have قِفَ نَبْكِ مِنْ ذِكْرَى حَبِيبِي وَمَنْزِلِي بِسِقْتِ اللِّوَى بَيْنَ الدَّخُولِ فَحُمِلِي. These lines composed by Imrul Qais, or even really finding that all the qasaid, all the major qasaid composed at that time, they usually opened with the nasib and the tashbib. So this tradition was modified. It was rejected in some cases. So we find that it was not rejected totally, because when you have a genre, poetic genre coming to you through ages, through centuries, through generations, it cannot be wiped out from our memory, because we have been trained. Our memory has been trained. Our language taste of art, taste of emotions, expressions have been trained on some specific lines. So it is not possible to erase the things totally. So what actually happens is that things become dimmed, a little bit eclipsing. An act of eclipsing is over there. Court patronage, especially Harun al-Rashid and Mamun and Bait al-Hikmah, encouraged poetic innovations, and this is again one of the very significant points related to the social status of poets, the position they yielded in society, especially in the Abbasid society. The oral tribation tradition to the urban written form. So it was there was a migration from the oral tribal tradition to the urban written form. The starting point has already been seen in the backdrop of the Umayyads, where people started documenting their writings, their compositions. So that grand tradition of orality and relying upon the collective memory, the collective memory. It has loosened its grip in order to make way for the written form of authentication and preservation. Rise of theology and grammar and philosophy enriched poetic language. So the theology was there, where we find different schools of theology, jurisprudence. They were the byproduct of interpreting the texts while they interpreted the texts. So this interpretation and the differences among them led to the emergence of differences that made way for emergence of specific schools like Ahnaf, school of the Ahnaf, Shawafi, Maliki, Hanabila, etc. Alongside other schools from the Shia theology as well as from the Mu'tazila and Khawarij, and also some independent thinkers like Imam Zuhri, Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna, uh, and others, Imam Dawud al-Zahiri, and others, of course. They had their independent schools of jurisprudence or theology. Theology, the word theology in this sequence is used for jurisprudence or the juristic thought, not religion. So areas of theology, grammar, because there was a need to standardize Arabic in view of the masses, the unlettered masses, the Ajam becoming part of the Arab culture, the Arab literary milieu, and sometimes posing some serious issues, serious problems regarding the standard version of a language, whether it was to be recited, it was read, or it was to be expressed. So, and philosophy, because in the backdrop of the assimilation of the cultures, the cultural legacy of other nations like the Greeks, chiefly the Greeks and Indians, it was for the first time that Arabia came into contact with something alien to their way of thought, to the method they employed for thinking. So the absence of philosophical legacy, that was simply the days had gone with the advent of the Abbasids, who patronized the outreach, the translation, assimilation of other cultures' legacies, whether they were related to poetry, as we find in the case of the poetics of Aristotle, rhetorics of Aristotle, which were translated to Arabic, or it is related to philosophy, like books of Aristotle and Plato and other Greek philosophers being translated into Arabic and then assimilated by the Arabic scholars. And these translations had played a significant role in the formation of philosophical schools, logical schools, scholastic schools in the domain of Islam itself. Then in the philosophy, all these things enriched the poetic language. Why? Because there were schools like the philosophical school of Arabic poetry, Abu Ala al-Ma'arri, and among others. So these things actually do form a, a great poetic narration, identity, culture, or poetic culture that is represented by the Abbasids. Fusion of reason and emotion. So you have here, you have the fusion of reason, that is al-aql, and emotion, that is al-atifa, a fusion of emergence of new form of poetry, that is amorous poetry, philosophical poetry, ascetic poetry, that is shi'ar zuhud. This is a shi'ar al-falsafi, This is Sharul Hubb, although we have the Sharul Hubb in the Umayyad period itself, especially in its two schools, that is Al-Hubb al-Uzri wa Al-Hubb al-Umri or Al-Hubb al-Ibahi. Renewed classical form. So classical form was renewed. There was no deviation as we find in modern times. Deviations we have, that is, we have the free verse, but in the Arab historical parameters, we don't have free verse until the modern times, when this experimentation was resorted to in the backdrop of the interaction between East and West, which was spearheaded during the Renaissance period, that is Rifa' Bik Tahtawi, under the banner of Rifa' Bik Tahtawi and others. Innovated with meter, rhyme, and simile. So there were some innovations because whether it is meter or rhyme or it is simile, that the figures of speech, they are the byproduct of human society. They cannot be taken in isolation. They are not the isolated things. So they take birth, they are given birth in the womb of society by the hard realities of society, by the actual realities, by the actualities of the society. So, like if the society is linguistically mixed, has the mixed nature, or there are the cultural minglings, cultural hybridity is there, then these things would be reflected in the domain of language, in similes, in poetic, that is, expressions, idioms, phrases, choice of words, etc. Explored inner feelings, irony, and human contradiction, because Abbasid culture, it represented a wide array of like complexities. Complexity is seen on the grounds of like language, culture, scholastic lines, also the scholastic lines, which are known as ulama ul kalam, the debates that took place between the different sections of society, even Muslim society, theological sections, like debates between Ahnaf and Shawafi and Maliki and Hanbal and Hanabila, the debates between the grammarians and the philosophers, as we have in the case of Abu Bishr Matta ibn Yunus and others. So these things actually lead us to this conclusion that there were the innovations with the meter, with the rhyme, and the simile. How, in terms of meter, there were the rubaiyat, for example. Rubaiyat, so the Persian rubaiyat were imitated because of the Persian influence. Rubaiyat, khumasiyat, for example. The rhyme and the simile, sometimes there were some mix experimentation, hybrid experimentation, or multilinguality, like a poem being composed in two languages. One line is in Arabic, another is in Persian. Like these lines of Khwaja Hafiz Shirazi, Ala ayyuha saqi adirka asawan awilha ka ishqa asan mood awal wali uftad mushkilha. This type of poetry is known as genre. Ala ya ayyuha saqi adirka asawan awilha ka ishqa asan mood awal wali uftad mushkilha. Huzur garahmi khawi azu ghafil mashu hafiz mata ma talqa bil ahwa da'id dunya wa ahmilha. So this is bilingual. We'll be having bilingual poetry during the Abbasid times and the Ottoman period, involving Arabic and Persian, Arabic and the Turkish, sometimes Arabic and Turkish and the Greek, as we find in the Diwan of Bahauddin Walad, the son of Maulana Rum, the great mystic poet Maulana Rum. So that sort of like a crossbreed of poetry and poetics was seen. It developed during the Abbasid times. Use of symbolism, wine, youth, garden, and metaphor of truth, especially in the Sufi poetry, in the spiritual poetry, in the Sufi poetry, the inner feelings and irony and human contradictions. While they explored these things, they symbolized things and expressed about their feelings with words like wine and youth and garden and as a metaphor of truth. It marked the birth of Arabic literary theory and theorist Al-Jahiz, Ibn Qutayba, Al-Askari, etc. and among the others. So for the first time we find the emergence of literary theory. Literary theory was there. Emergence of Balagha and Bayan. Al-Balagha wa Al-Bayan. Al-Balagha al-Bayan had been part of Arabic language because as a feature of language, these elements are inseparable. Only the thing is that at a later stage of history, things get codified, they get standardized, with lots of books written about, lots of compendiums being prepared, as we can see it in cases of all the languages of the world. The types of poetry in Abbasid period, we have the Sharul Madh, that is panegyric poetry, which is very much traditional. Sharul Haja, again, the satirical poetry, it is again traditional. Sharul Ratha, the elegiac poetry, it is again traditional. Sharul Ghazal, love poetry, again it is traditional. In all the two parameters, institutional parameters, classifications like Al-Hubb al-Uzri and Al-Hubb al-Ibahi, or the material love and the platonic love or pure love, alongside Al-Khamriyat, that actually combines the duo, that is the material aspect of the bliss, of the material bliss represented by this thing, that is wine, the material aspect of merrymaking, and the intoxication in terms of spirit, that is spiritual intoxication. It's not like one gets intoxicated only from the material aspect. So here, sometimes we have a far greater, a far more powerful intoxication, which is known as al-hubb al-ilahi, al-ishq al-ilahi. So Sharul Ghazal combined between the two as alongside Al-Khamriyat. So that's why we'll be having Abu al-Atahiya representing Al-Khamriyat, Al-Ghazal and Al-Khamriyat at the same time, Az-Zuhud and Al-Khamriyat at the same time. So Az-Zuhud, that is the Sufi poetry or the spiritual poetry, alongside Al-Khamriyat, that is the wine poetry. Al-Ghilmaniyat, that is amorous Ghilmaniyat poetry, is it was an experimentation, a facet. It was a new phenomenon that was observed for the first time in the Arabic poetic circles, in Arabic poetic tradition. Here, the subject matter of love was not a damsel, rather a boy. So this was something like a paradigm shift as regards the object of love. So the historians have pointed out that it was like a byproduct of the interaction between the Arab culture that took place between the Arab culture and the Persian and other cultures, the Roman cultures. Then, of course, we have the Ashiaru Siyasi, because the political stage was far greater, powerful. It has emerged far greater and powerful during the Abbasid times. alongside Ashirul Falsafi, that is the philosophical poetry. Why philosophical poetry? In the backdrop of translation of the Greek text, Greek philosophical texts of, say, Aristotle and Plato and others, Socrates and others, the uh, we find an impetus, rather birth of the philosophical thought, the philosophical uh, uh, way of projecting the things, of addressing the things, observing the things, and inferring the results. There is the way of that is analysis and inference on the logical ground, on the rational ground. So here they started thinking on the rational grounds, and this rational aptitude, it was something alien to the Muslim culture, because the Muslim theology uh, uh, depended on it is primarily based on the revelation. It is the revelation. The ijtihad comes only in regard to confining yourself to the text and how to interpret them. So it is something like taking help of philosophy of rationality or philosophic methodology, while addressing the questions of theology, or defense or in defense of theology. So it was something taken, a byproduct of the translation movement and the transmission of the philosophical thoughts, cultural concepts from the neighbors, from the culturally and intellectually affluent or rich neighbors, as we find in the examples of the Greeks and Indians. So, because of Asharul Falsafi, then Az-Zuhdiyat, the spiritual poetry, then Al-Mulimmat, the poetry of sufferings, Ma Yulim bil Insan, Al-Mulimmat, alongside Al-Mulammat. So these are the two kinds of two genres. One is Mulimmat, another is Al-Mulammat. Al-Mulimmat is something like related to the sufferings, to some to the isolated painful experiences one might can have in his life, in his personal life, or in society, and that would be like pushing him into the domain of, into the helm of az-zuhd or spirituality. So we'll be having this in the bilingual poetry. We have that the mix between language and between two languages, as we have pointed out, that is Arabic and Persian. Allah ya ayyuha saqi adar ka sawana billah ke ishq asan umuda wale uftad mushkil hai. Descriptive poetry, al-madaih, of course, ashar al-ijtima, that is social poetry, the Sufi poetry, the nature poetry, the nature prelude, alongside Sharul Munazarat wal Mujadat al Fikriya, because there were lots of debates between different groups of society. These debates were based on the theological projections of things, interpretation of things, philosophical way of looking at the things, and in inferring the results. So poetic debates and intellectual dialogues. This resulted in Shir al-Munazarat wal Mujadalat al-Fikriya, alongside the innovative or the modernist Abbasid poetry. We'll be having these details regarding Khamriyat poetry. We have we have discussed the primary motifs, the wordings of Khamriyat. Abu Nawas and Abu al-Itahiyya are the primary examples. We'll be having examples of that. Then Al-Ghilmaniyat, of course, Abu Nawas, Bashar bin Burd, Abbas ibn al-Ahnaf, Walid bin Yazid, and Hussein al-Dhahhak. They are the major poets related to that genre of poetry. In the domain of political poetry, we have Abu Tammam primarily, alongside the others like Al-Buhturi and Di'bal Al-Khuzai, Abu Atahiya also, Bashar ibn Burda also, Al-Mutanabbi, who has been a legend in his lifetime itself. Then we have Ashar al-Falsafi. We have already talked about Abu al-Ala al-Ma'arri. هذا جناه أبي علي وما جنيت على أحد. His Luzumiyat. He's the most prominent philosophical poet in the history of Arabic poetry, especially during the Abbasid times. Alongside the philosophical concepts and lines and thinking, we'll be finding in the poetry of Abu Nawas al-Buhtari, Abu al-Atahiya and Ibn Rumi. Although Ibn Rumi primarily focuses on the expression of human sentiments, human feelings, so his poetry is primarily subjective poetry, so it doesn't philosophize in general, but when it comes to depicting the meanings of the concepts of the life, so here we have philosophizing, and here again we'll be finding philosophy in the mold of emotions. In Al-Mulimmat, you'll be having the specific language. It was because of the political assassinations, moral decline, social inequality, and personal loss. The genre became a mirror of conscience, blending emotion with philosophy, and it mourned the collective suffering of peoples. So the major themes were the tragedy of death, death of loved ones, ruin of nations, and existential sorrow. There were the ethical reflections, suffering as a test of patience and wisdom, and human compassion and spiritual resilience. The imagery, night, tomb, tears, silence, broken dreams, etc. It was inspired later on. It inspired later on the Sufi poets and the Andalusian poets. The major poets of the time are Ibn Rumi, Abu Tammam, Abu al-Atahiya, Al-Buhtari, among others we have seen, because that period actually presents a large number of the poetic fraternity, presenting to us a wider legacy of a rich legacy of different blends, starting from the classical voice up to the modern, that is muhdath voice, and extended to something like mingling of cultures, even language, as we have in the case of mulamma'at, or having some specific, developing specific ways, scansion system, structural ways, structural entities like khumasi in Arabic, rubai in Arabic, dobait in Arabic, etc. So these were the innovations. So we have the classical voice, classical identity, classical charm, classical aesthetics, classical standard standing alongside the modern voices, sometimes the hybrid voices during the Abbasid times, and that was actually dictated by, warranted by the very nature of Abbasid period. That was very much it was not it was not traditional primarily. It tended to adopt the new, adapt to the existing reality. Hence, it was a blend of the classic things and modernity, as the society was very much cosmopolitan. It was a mixed society with mixed cultures, mixed ideologies. So, blend of all things actually paved the way for a far greater legacy, even in the domain of poetry. With this, we conclude this lecture. Thank you.